reviewing a single malt whiskey. That is the Ardmore Island Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Now, and I've talked to a few people recently who were just coming into the whiskey world, newbies just starting out on the journey, and there's some confusion to what a single malt, the word single malt, as a quantifier for a whiskey actually signifies. And I was at a chat with a person the other day, and he assumed that single malt meant that this was just one particular whiskey, a whiskey that had all come from one batch of whiskey. But that's not what single malt means. Single malt whiskey is very much a blended whiskey, though it's blended in the sense, not in the sense that, say, a standard blend like you buy from a shop, one of the most common blends like Teachers, for instance, or Famous Grouse, or White and Mackay. But single malt is actually a mixture of different whiskies, malt whiskies, but they've all had to come from the same distillery. That's why it's allowed to use the quantifier single malt. So this is a single malt, so it's not a whiskey from one particular cask, not one particular batch of whiskey, but a mixture of malt whiskies all made by the same distillery, the Ardmore Distillery. Now the Ardmore Distillery was originally founded, it was part of the Teachers Whisky Group. It's based up in Aberdeenshire, near a little town, Kennethmont. I hope I pronounced that right. The tube it comes in is rather attractive. The Ardmore Island Single Malt Scotch Whisky Legacy, and it's billed as being lightly peated. We've got a map here of where the distillery is, and there's the distillery in red there. You've got the railway line here, and the railway line is situated very close to the distillery. And back in the day, it meant that back in the day when Teachers owned the whiskey, it could be shipped out, or rather trained out, on the trains to get it all over the British Isles and even further afield, because Scotch whisky has always historically had a strong market in the United States. So on the bottle, on the tube rather, it tells us that the Ardmore Legacy is lightly peated, light and sweet with unique Highland peat smoky notes. So it's not a Speyside whiskey, it's from the islands. The tube tells us a complex process that yields an astonishing result. The smooth peated yet perfectly balanced liquid that is the Ardmore, traditionally handcrafted in the Scottish Highlands. The Ardmore Distillery has been watched over by a family of rare eagles since 1898. This is a place, and indeed a process, that brings men, might and metal together in a celebration of the raw power of nature. And there's a copper golden eagle there. Oh, I shouldn't have said copper when it's golden. A golden eagle there on the tube. There's also another one there on the top. And the bottle itself contains the same artwork, the same old map. It's rather attractive to look at, isn't it? And the golden eagle there. The golden eagle motif is also carried on to the sleeve over the bottle. So let's just get this opened a minute. Now, as I say, this single malt, it's a no age statement whiskey, so it's at the cheapest end of the market. I paid £20 for this bottle, so that's comparable with what you'd pay for many of the blended whiskies out there. But it is, as I say, a single malt, still a blended whiskey, but it just means it's blended using malt whiskies all from the same distillery, and that is the Ardmore Distillery. It's chill filtered, it comes in at 40%. It's a lovely, I don't think there's been much colouring used in this. It's a golden, light golden, caramelly colour maybe. The Ardmore Distillery is part of the Beam Suntory group, that's Jim Beam and the Japanese Suntory whiskies. A unique expression of the Ardmore, marriage of peated and unpeated single malt whisky. Distilled and bottled in Scotland, established 1898, and it comes in at 40% per volume. This originally, when this came out, it was a replacement for the original Ardmore, which a lot of whiskey aficionados and experts weren't happy with the replacement, because this comes in at 40% ABV and the original came in at 46% ABV, which caused some, should we say, consternation with whiskey enthusiasts. Now, the Ardmore Distillery is situated at the highest point of the Northern Railway line, which is this artwork you can see here, and it's 600 feet above sea level. The water used in the whiskey comes from the springs that flow out of the huge Knockhandy Hill, and I hope I pronounced that right again. And it's double matured, of course. First in American oak, so that's ex-bourbon casks, and then in small quarter casks. Now there's no age statement on here, but that tells us it's got to be at least 3 years old. I suspect there are some more older malts in here, particularly just because I have drunk this before and it doesn't taste overly young. So let's pop the cork. Love that sound. Is there a better sound in the world than the sound of a cork going? And let's pour ourselves a glass. Where have I put my little tasting glass? I smashed one of my Glencairn glasses this morning. I was gutted because it was crystal. So this isn't exactly a Glencairn glass, but it's got the similar tulip shape with the chimney, so I'm using this for the tasting today. So let's take the whiskey to the nose. Now again, not smoke as such, considering this is lightly peated, and that for me was a selling point, because I do like peated whiskies. And another lightly peated whiskey that I tend to drink quite often is the famous Grouse Smoky Black expression, which is lightly peated. I do from time to time like a really strongly peated whiskey, like a Lefroy maybe, or an Ardbeg. But the Ardmore is on the more lightly end of the market, and you know it has its place. It's especially good if you're not familiar with peated whiskies and you want to perhaps a bit of vanilla there, some sweet honey. Very, very faint hint of smoke. So let's take it to the palate and see what we think. Before I do though, I'd like to comment that the consistency of whiskey is very pleasing. It's comforting to see it in the glass. The legs, it's got a decent pair of legs. You can see them coating down the side of the glasses as they're swirling. So let's just give it a little taste and see what it does on the palate. Now right away you've got that smoke there. Considering this is billed as lightly peated, the peat is forefront. Smoke, kind of charcoaly. It reminds you of if you've ever cooked, say, jacket potatoes in a bonfire or a barbecue, at the skin of those potatoes is delicious. It's got the charcoaly kind of, and this has that. I'm also getting that sweetness that was promised on the nose. Honey. I'm not tasting any vanilla. Well, I'm getting that sweet honey taste. But yes, the smoke is at the forefront. There's a little bit of spice, but the overriding factor in terms of taste, besides the smoke, is the sweetness. a sweet golden honey taste. So let's give it just a touch of water to break it up a little. Now, I know there are whiskey purists out there who say the only way to drink whiskey is neat. I don't agree with that. I think you should drink whiskey the way you want to. You should drink whiskey with soda if that's your thing. You should drink it over ice, which is my usual way of consuming whiskey. I have my whiskey always on the rocks, except when I'm doing a taste, such as this one. I will take it completely neat. But even then, I feel that the whiskey is improved with the addition of a little water. So I've got a jug of distilled water here. I'm just going to put a little tiny bit in, just a little pour of water. There we are, that's plenty. In fact, I may have been a bit heavy on the water there. We'll swirl it around the glass a moment and allow the whiskey to do its thing. While the water's the chemical reaction is taking place between the water and the whiskey, perhaps I'll tell you about something I've been writing about. I'm doing good now, moving ahead. Steam. I'm on that railway line on my book, A Dark History of Whisky, which is due to come out from Pen and Sword Books sometime the year after next. And in the book there's a chapter called A Whisky Miscellany, which basically collects together all miscellaneous aspects, little quirky stories surrounding the whiskey world, the world of whiskey. And I call this chapter, which I was just going to basically call it a whiskey miscellaneous, whiskey miscellany, but in the end I decided on a whiskey mixer. I thought that was a good name for that chapter. But I've just been writing about a cat, and many in the whiskey industry would have heard of this cat. The name of the cat was Passport, but that was his second name. Actually, his first name was Dizzy. Well, he probably had a name before that, but we don't know what that was. And it's a really fantastic story. Now, it stems back to the American law, where all bourbon must be aged in brand new American oak casks, charred casks, single-use casks. They can only be used once, which means then that once the casks have been used, they kind of surplus to requirements. Now, Scotch has no such ruling. And even today you'll find that the majority of Scotch whisky, not all, there is some Scotch which may be matured in brand new casks, but most Scotch is aged in second-hand casks, and the majority of second-hand casks, you can use port casks, you can use sherry casks, you can use wine casks, you can use all manner of casks, but the majority of Scotch is aged in ex-American bourbon casks. Whiskey, like any spirit, when it comes straight from the distillery, straight from the stills, is clear, and it gets a lot of its taste and colours from the barrel, from its time spent within the barrel. So it has always been cost effective for Scotch whisky producers to purchase ex-bourbon barrels from the United States for use in aging their whiskies. And back in 1993, the Glenkeith Distillery had just had a delivery of from Kentucky, from various points in Kentucky, of ex-bourbon barrels. When one of the workers was alarmed to hear a tiny scratching coming from one of the barrels, and a couple of them listened to this, and it became apparent that some sort of animal, some sort of critter, had somehow found its way into the barrels back in Kentucky, then survived a 4-week journey right across the ocean onto the railway lines, and when it was shipped up to the distillery, it was amazing. So they phoned the manager, and the manager then phoned the Scottish Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals to ask for some advice, and he was rather alarmingly told to drill an hole in the cask and gas whatever critter had found its way inside, but they didn't want to do that. And there were a lot of suggestions thrown about on a distillery floor that morning as to what was in the barrel, with the workers trying to think what kind of critters were prevalent in Kentucky. They didn't know exactly where in Kentucky this particular barrel had come from, because the shipment of barrels consisted of barrels which came from numerous distilleries across the water, across the pond. A raccoon was suggested, rats were suggested. A rat seemed the most likely culprit. Someone even said, what if there's a skunk in there? But it was eventually decided to cut an hole in the barrel, to actually open the barrel and tempt whatever critter had gotten itself trapped outside with a bit of a bowl of food. So I think it was dog food that was placed down and a bit of milk, and the bowl was put there, and eventually, slowly, a tiny black and white kitten emerged, really unsteady on his feet, wobbling all over the place, because this has incredibly survived this 4-week journey, surviving on a sustenance that consisted entirely of the condensation within the barrel, the whiskey condensation within the barrel. So the cat was immediately named Dizzy, but eventually the name was changed and he became a much beloved pet and mouser at the Glenkeith Distillery. When its name was changed to Passport, because Glenkeith, of course, made the famous blended whiskey Passport back then. So that's just a lovely little story, and that you can read that full story as well as stories of other distillery cats such as Towser the Mouser, who very famous cat who's actually in the Guinness Book of Records as having a record number of mouse kills at 30,000. I'm remembering offhand, so I may have the figure wrong there, but anyway, he's actually listed in the Guinness Book of World Records. So let's get back to the Ardmore for a moment. So the water now has done its thing. The aroma now I'm not getting so much of the smoke. Smoke's there and the taste though, and the honey, sweet honey. Oh, it's so smooth. It's quite good. Now, this is not an expensive whiskey. As I say, it's no age statement. I purchased this for £20, so that's, as I say, comparable with a lot of blended whiskies. It is a fine whiskey. It's very refreshing. It's tasty. That honey, that sweet honey taste it's got a good finish. You're getting that smoke, but it's not an overriding smoke. So if you want to an introduction to peated whiskies, if you want to see if peated whiskies are going to be your thing, then the Ardmore is certainly a good place to start. It also looks, the bottle is presented, it looks a hell of a lot more expensive than it is. Wonderful artwork on the tube there. A topographical map. This is an old map. I'd like to know from where this map originates, but it gives all the elevations here of some of the hills in the area, and the height above sea level. It lists the Kirkwood Woods, Kenneth Mont, there's Knockhandy Hill, which is, as I mentioned, where the water comes from that you're drinking in here. So, you know, I mean, each time you drink, take a glass of whiskey in your hand, you really are drinking the history, because no whiskey's made from tap water. You don't just put the tap on it. This is made from quality water, which has worked its way through the strata, through the limestone, through the clay, through the soil, through the stones of the ground where it emerges. And so you really are tasting history. And that may be a little bit romantic on my part, but I always get that feeling of you're tasting something of the area where the whiskey comes from, which is an interesting concept, because in wine, the concept of terroir is very important in wine. And terroir basically relates to the geographical region where the wine is made. So the soil structure where the grapes are grown, the weather, you know, it all comes into effect, and ultimately brings about the taste of the drink. And, you know, is terroir important in the world of whiskey? Some whiskey experts seem to think so, that a particular grain, where the grain was grown, will eventually affect the taste of the whiskey, the weather in the area. So whenever I do, as I say, drink a whiskey from anywhere in the world, whether it be it a bourbon, be it a Scotch, be it a Japanese whiskey, be it a Canadian whiskey, be it an Irish whiskey, I do like to think that I'm tasting something of the region where it was produced. So that's the Ardmore. Inexpensive. It's a good whiskey, sweet. predominantly on a golden honey taste. The smoke is there though. The smoke is very much there. It seems subdued at first, but it's there, especially in the aftertaste. I've got that charcoaly taste